Hey everyone, it's me, IP. Otherwise known as your favorite shitty internet roommate. And if you're new here, this is actually a sequel to my other Pokemon video where I whine and bitch about the downfall of its region design, specifically going into the 3D era games. If you haven't seen that video, definitely check it out after this one. And if you have seen it,
you're gonna make me act up.
Thank you all so much for running those numbers up. I love y'all. And if I could, I'd give you all individually a smooch and maybe I'd clap my cheeks vigorously upon your pelvis, respectfully, of course. But where that video ended was right in the shithole, otherwise known as the Galar region. So now with this video, we'll be discussing the Hisui region to the Paldea region. And I've seen the comments. I know some of you are just creaming your pants in anticipation for me to summon some shadow clones and just raw dog, spirit gun, Rasengan, and Kamehameha the brains out of these new games' region designs. And I absolutely will be doing that. I'm gonna be cooking with this critiquing shit in this video, trust. But just because I'm not, grabbing the coping fans, don't worry guys, it's just a trailer. They're definitely gonna fix it before release. Woo! They're not gonna be cradled in my arms, sucking on my warm bosom and being told that it's the best game ever since the release of Apari's recent collection. Buy it! Doesn't mean that all I'm gonna be doing is blindly hating either. Because, and this might be a little bit of a steaming hot take, I'm afraid to say it, I feel like there's multiple guns pointed at my head. I'm like one letter away on someone's death note. There are things about these games and their regions that I genuinely enjoy.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
My main goal is to approach these videos in the same way I did with my first video. As fairly as possible and as a genuine fan who not only expects more from this series, but as many of us deserves better. But I'm also going to avoid using the bugs, glitches, or performance issues as critiques. Because while yes, this is embarrassing, this game runs like booty cheeks, but I don't want to use that as ammo because I don't want anyone to think that the problems with these games are strictly performance issues. Because when that becomes the loudest complaint they hear, then they think all they have to do is make a patch to fix those bugs and boom, they have a great Pokemon game. But no, there's much bigger problems that I'm going to address. And funny enough, those bugs and the problems I'm gonna bring up all come from the same issue. And that issue isn't Game Freak being lazy, but I'm getting a little ahead of myself. So let's get into it. Real quick, let's do a refresher of what I feel makes a great region design. I always felt like the regions that these games take place in, their Pokemon worlds, is what always drew me to the series and one of the best parts of this series. First thing you need is great towns. Let's use Ecruteak from Johto as an example. It's the gold standard for having the three things that I think makes a great town. A uniquely beautiful looking aesthetic. It has content, something unique to do in the town that isn't just the gym that every other town also has. It has the burnt tower that you can explore and the bell tower that has trainers and some unique level design there too. And finally, it has lore. Basically, a town needs to have history and culture that you can pick up on from any means necessary. It could be NPCs, it could be reading something, as long as it's interesting. The second thing a region needs is great routes. To make a great route, you need, again, a unique look. I feel like the best regions always have a wide variety of unique looking locations and biomes. Another thing that makes routes great is content within those routes. Just something to do here and there so it's not just an empty field. To give you some examples, you could put a tower that you can go up into and battle some trainers, or some ruins that you find and there's like an underground section with trainers to battle. And of course, interesting level design. I mainly look for this in the many caves and or forests. And I always hope to see more of this because I genuinely think people severely underrate how good Game Freak is at level design. First and foremost, I just want to mention, getting isekai'd into the past by a Pokemon god who you can talk to through a smartphone? That is quite the setup for like a multi-million-dollar solid 5 out of 10 anime. When I saw this trailer, I was genuinely so in love with the idea of exploring a past version of a region that we know of. Especially when it's the Sinnoh region, which I think is one of the top 3 regions of all the series. There's just so much to work with here. You get to see ancestors of characters from the future, past versions of Pokemon, and you get to see how the culture of the present games was built up upon from the past, like their appreciation of Mount Coronet, for example. As someone who genuinely loves the Let's Go games and thinks there should be more of them, I also think we should be getting more of these legends, you know, past versions of regions type games. But let us actually begin to talk about the town. The town. Jubilife Village is one of, if not the most fleshed out, realized settlements in the entire Pokemon series. First off, it's obviously very beautiful. It obviously has the look of a very traditional Japanese-based village. And at nighttime, when the lights go up, it only looks more gorgeous. Outside of the Galaxy Hall, all the houses have that sense of like they're still being built. Everything just kind of got settled. I love being able to see Mount Coronet at all times in the background. And just in general, I really love the art style of Pokemon Arceus. It has that sort of Japanese wood carving painting kind of look, kind of similar to what Demon Slayer was going for with its aesthetic. And you can pretty much enter every building and talk to everyone. I'm stressing this for a reason you'll see in the future. But on top of that, this town is full of content. Obviously you have the Galaxy Hall where you get all your missions and objectives from. But even if we don't count that, let's just look at that as like a gym, for example. There's still so much to do in this single town. You have the training grounds, which as you progress through the game will constantly have different things for you to do at them. My favorite aspect of it though is that later on you'll be able to actually have a whole selection of like who you just want to have a random battle with if you're feeling like it, which is so awesome. I would love to see that in every town. And there's a bunch of NPCs that have certain requests that you can help them with. And with all of them, they usually require a certain type of Pokemon to help them out. So you can give them a certain Pokemon to help them, and then that Pokemon will just be in the town. So by the end of the game, the town will be more populated with Pokemon that you chose. This not only makes the town obviously way more lively, but because this game takes place in the past, a lot of people don't understand Pokemon and they're scared of them, so that connection that we usually see between people and Pokemon isn't really there. And doing this in a sense kind of puts it on you to build that connection between people and Pokemon. It was so interesting to, at the beginning, hear NPCs talk about their fear of Pokemon because they were hurt by them, then help this town slowly build bonds with Pokemon. I love this mechanic and I hope to see it return in future games. I think every town should be able to be populated by Pokemon that you chose to give to NPCs to help them. You can even help the many shops get even a wider selection of things that you can purchase by helping them get a certain Pokemon. You want to look like Tanjiro, you stinky virgin too busy studying the blade weeb? Well, you can. You just gotta catch some Pokemon and bring them to the shop. As someone who doesn't really like catch them all when I play these games, like I legit look up the decks, I pick my 6 Pokemon that I'm gonna get, and like that's it. This was a great way to incentivize that for me. Like I was catching so many Pokemon because of this. And I'm always gonna want more drip options, because I love customizing my character's drip, especially the shirt and pants. And of course, there's a lot of lore and culture to find out simply by talking to the NPCs in this town. Something I really appreciated about the world building of this game was that early on, the NPCs have to take time to really warm up to you. And this is because these people are a lot more on edge and cautious. They're constantly fearing for their life for Pokemon because they don't understand them that well yet. One of the NPCs even insinuates you to be a freeloader, but this is because the town is just being built up. You have to kind of ration your food. Survival is a constant battle here. So of course, unlike other games, they're not just gonna want to immediately lick your asshole clean. You're an outsider, they don't trust you immediately. But because they respect the Galaxy team, once you become a member, they slowly start to warm up to you. This made the town and the people living in it feel more real because they kind of slowly have a character arc in a sense. The only real problem with this town is that it's the only town in the game. It's like Game Freak saw my video and were like, oh, you want a great town? Then we'll give you one. Just one. But it does go to show that these developers, if given the time, can make great fleshed out towns. I would love to see a game with multiple towns of this level. That'd be amazing. You'd never hear me complain for cents on the internet again. I'll still find a way. I'm a YouTuber, professional complainer and all that. But although it is a problem that there is only one town, this could be remedied by making the outside world have a lot of content. So with that, let's go ahead and get into the routes, or wild, or the world. Something that bothered me about the Galar region was that you only get control of the camera and get a real like open-esque design is when you were in the wild area. Which even on its own was empty as f. There's like nothing to do in the wild area. And it would have been fine if those routes were like good, but a lot of them had like zero interesting pathing. Most of them were just like either a straight line or a straight line with like one loop. But here, it's all open, baby. Just this huge world to explore. Except it's kinda not. You see, if you want to get from one point to another on the map, you can't just like go there. If you're already in one area, you need to talk to the professor, and then he'll go through a bunch of dialogue, then you go back to the town, and then you talk to another NPC, and then you can pick another open-ish level that you want to go to. It's pretty frustrating design. It's a big pain in the wee-wee, but it does definitely feel way more free and fleshed out than Galar's take on. And there's just a bunch of different biomes to explore. You have your typical grasslands, your beach sections, you got a volcanic section, a snow section, a swampy kind of marsh. And while none of these are exactly wholly unique to the series, these are still diverse locations. I love to add to that sense of danger in this world that the Pokemon can actually hit you. They even give your ass a Dark Souls roll to dodge Pokemon. I love this aspect. It helped the world feel a lot more dangerous and interesting and like kind of mysterious to explore. This to me is definitely a step up from the Galar region. But unfortunately, there still are some of the same problems. Again, I love that Pokemon are just walking around in the wild. You can see all of them. And I love the mechanic of just being able to throw a ball and dip. You don't have to initiate a battle to catch a Pokemon. But unfortunately, the Pokemon still aren't really doing anything interesting in the wild. The mobs are just kind of walking around like Nimrods, almost like waiting to be caught. It's a little better than Galar because at least these ones can hurt you and attack you, but I'd still like to see more so that it feels more like a real Pokemon world. Give us interactions between two different species of Pokemon, have them battle for specific areas or something. Give us more Pokemon doing something specific in their environment. Imagine walking up to an area and then seeing like Kangaskhan reaching their little Kangaskhan out into the tree so they can grab a berry and like eat it or something. This would help make the Pokemon and world feel more real and immersive. Versus now where it's just kind of like their whole point of existing is to be caught by you. And unfortunately, there's still not much to really do in these world parts of the game. Outside of catching Pokemon and the story elements, you're really just running through fields of nothing for a good while. This is something that was usually remedied in older games with like towers that you go up to battle trainers. Or in Hoenn, there was that whole castle in the desert that would vanish in and out. You need to pepper the world out with interesting landmarks like those to really fill it out. This will also help in older regions with things like forests and caves. But those caves and forests were usually like interesting levels that had level design and trainers to battle. But for some reason, a lot of the newer Pokemon games just don't really have that anymore. A lot of the caves here are simply just straight, maybe sort of winding paths to reach another area. Outside of a very few, most of the caves also just kind of look the same and they don't really have anything different from each other. So in conclusion, we have a very well developed town and a level-based world that, while having diverse biomes, doesn't really have anything to do in that world outside of catching mons. Not enough trainers or content-filled landmarks or interesting side quests or really anything. At least not enough to fill out the world. But we actually do have more to speak on. Because the moment we took a step into this open world, Game Freak was like, "Hey yo, new Pokemon Gen just dropped! Yeah!" Are you feeling depressed? Down in the dumps, poured yourself a mean bowl of cereal, but turns out there was no milk in the fridge, and now you feel like life has no color or meaning, and where your soul should be, there's just a big, black, empty void? Why not take that empty void and fill it with some straight up Apari drip? Apari is an artist-owned brand, so everything you see here is original artwork that you can wear. That's right, we are once again sponsored by Apari, and the last time that was more of a hyping up the release, which I want to thank all those supportive comments from last time with a big ol' smoocha. Mwah! But this time, plain and simple, if you go down to the pinned comment or the link above, you can check out their fully launched Fall/Winter 2022 collection. It's all out. This not only helps you get some drip like this main piece hoodie, which feels so soft and thick and has this art on the back that you just have to feel the texture of, but also one of my favorites, this kind of vintage looking earthy plum colored tee. Definitely try to get one of these before they sell out. But it also genuinely really helps the Internet Pitstop channel if you go to that link and you check out their stuff, because it means the Internet Pitstop can get more sponsors like this. And once again, all you have to do is go to the link at the top or the pinned comment below and check out their stuff. And if you want to keep up with their future drops, you can follow all their socials here, which will also be in the pinned comment. Thank you, Apari, and back to the video. Just so you all know where my loyalties stand, I chose Fuecoco. Cause that looks like a cereal box mascot, and I'm not a furry. Team Fuecoco, drop some W's in the comments, my brethren. But then cool purple ghost sword boy ended up being a fire type, so I have to drop him, so. Paldea equally surprisingly with some really great choices and some of the worst embarrassing cut corners I've ever seen in these games. Before we start though, let's do a real quick, what amazing, cool, innovative mechanics that everybody in the fandom loved did Game Freak decide to drop in the next game this time? Did you like just how many drip options there were last time that you could improve by doing certain tasks? Don't worry, because Game Freak doesn't give a f. Now our options are even more limited than Pokemon X and Y, aka the first time they ever introduced the customization mechanic. Ooh, but they might let us do it for DLC! Ah yes, good game design is when you pay for something that you could have done in a past game for free. Really upsetting they didn't keep the movement from Pokemon Arceus. I would have really liked for the Pokemon still be able to attack you and for you to be able to roll and dodge them. And I think everyone agrees that we should have kept the catching mechanic from Pokemon Arceus. Never has catching felt more free than in Pokemon Arceus, where you could just run around, throw a Pokeball, and keep going. With that out of the way, let us go ahead and start talking about the towns of this region. And I want to start with one of my personal favorites, Artezone. Immediately, it's a very beautiful, colorful looking town because of all the mini flowers, and there's lots of certain little landmarks. You got the famous hedge maze, there's that little bridge section that's kind of like a little garden, there's the playground. These really help make the town aesthetically more unique. Unfortunately, none of those landmarks are exactly content, because you don't really do anything in them outside of the gym test. You could have simply just put a few NPCs to battle in the maze or the playground. Or what would have made this town absolutely flourish was maybe putting a few gardeners on the hedge maze, kind of cutting it up, trying to make it look nice, but they need help, so they ask you for a certain Pokemon, and thus, much like Arceus, allowing you to add certain Pokemon to make the town more lively. This would have been a great way to make these landmarks actually have content. Without that, these are just part of the aesthetic, they're just kind of background scenery. This would be like going into Orgberg City and seeing the mine and being able to go into it, but you can't do anything, like there's no trainers to battle, it's just a mine. But the town does have its own lore and culture. The gym leader is an artist and he wants to be Kurama so bad. And because of that, you see his art pieces all over the town. And one of the coolest things about it is the reason I actually went to this town first was because in the library, I actually read about this town and how their people appreciate Sunflora. It was so cool to read that and then come here and see all the art of Sunflora and see the people interacting with Sunflora. I will say though, the gym test having you chase Sunflora around the hedge maze, around the playground, does kind of give it some sort of content in a sense, but that's more tied to the gym test, which every other town also has. has, but this is definitely the closest it comes to getting it. Now, if you're sitting there and wondering, wait, so his favorite town is a town that looks pretty good, has a little bit of lore, but no interesting content? Yeah, which should tell you what you're in for. Two other towns I really enjoyed were Cascarafa and Porto Marinda. I mentioned both because they're kind of connected in a sense. Both of them being near the desert, pretty much right across from each other. This allows the one that is a port town that gets fresh produce to then give that fresh produce immediately to the other, which is a cool lore connection between them. I absolutely love the look of Casca. It's this beautiful blue waterfall city, basically being an oasis in the desert, which works for that kind of contrasting look of a brown, dry desert and a flourishing blue waterfall city. I love this contrast of having this beautiful water-based city, but still having this sandstorm blowing all through it. And you even get some cool origin lore learning that it was built on the sides of cliffs, which is why it has these multiple tiers and it can have these waterfalls. This is lore that explains the design. But outside of the gym, content-wise, there's not really anything to do here. Across that, Marinda is a port town. So of course, with everything being sent here first, it's a bustling produce market. You even get some cool little lore about how there used to be fights that would break out a lot here, but since then it's become a lot more safe for Pokemon, kids, and tourists. But content-wise, not much to really do here. Now, I could keep doing every town, but I think you're starting to see a pattern here. You tend to get some pretty good aesthetics. You get some lore, some culture. Sometimes it's just a little bit of flavor text. Other times it's a whole origin, but no content. And this is actually a running problem for every single town in this region. There is almost nothing to do outside of the gym in these towns. And even when there is a interesting, unique landmark like there would be in older games, they're usually empty or don't have anything to do in them. And at points, some of these towns get even more cut corners-esque than Galar. At least with Galar, for the most part, you can enter most of the buildings. But in every town in Paldea, there is a significant amount of buildings and houses that you just cannot enter. The only buildings you can really enter outside of maybe 2 or 3 are the typical copy-paste shops that are in every other town. And they didn't even bother to make the shops unique. They're literal copy-paste. In every town, you'll find the exact same seaside cafe, the exact same burratos, the exact same grill. The only thing to really look forward to when going into these towns is that the shops will have different clothing items. But other than that, for the most part, every town has the same copy-pasted shops, and they're the only buildings that you can really enter. Not only does this mean that each town has no content, but it also means that it has even less lore because you have less NPCs to talk to. You don't have any unique building or something interesting to interact with in each town. It makes all the towns just kind of blend in together and just be bland. This would be like going into Lavender Town, but there's no Pokemon Tower. And because of that, it makes it harder for any of these towns to really stick in my mind. One of the worst examples of this is Zapapico. This town, because it doesn't have a gym, especially shows the problem with not giving these towns content. In this whole space of a town, you can't enter any building except 2. And those 2 are just the copy-paste shops. It's funny too because there's glaring opportunities. There's like this mine worker guy who says that after they're done working on the mine, they battle here. You could have let us battle the mine workers there, this giving the town much needed content. But the cut corners of content get even worse. Because pretty much every single one of these copy-pasted shops that's in every town, except for maybe 2, doesn't have a designed interior. In prior games, when you entered a shop and or building, there was usually a couple characters in there, maybe some, some shelves, whatever. But in here, when you go inside, there's nothing but an item menu. And it's so sad because there's so many towns in this game that could have been great. For example, look at Levincia. It's this really cool, upbeat, lively city with these multicolored spotlights shooting in the air. It has some culture because the gym leader is an influencer and everybody around the town knows her and talks about her. She legit gets fat donos from her simps. There's this whole like New York Times Square neon lights and signs everywhere. But again, the only thing to do here outside of the gym, content-wise, are the exact same copy-pasted shops that you can get at any other town. There's even this little side section that has these multiple skyscrapers. You can't go inside any of them. And it's so laughable to see that because so many regions before this got this big city thing done right. Univa's big city had so much accessible to the player. You can enter almost any building. There's some that have trainers to battle, multiple floors of NPCs to talk to and interact with. This helped that city feel lively. The biggest city in this game is Mesa Goza. This city only has, again, the same type of copy-pasted shops that you can get at any other town. There's even this little like townhouse section, and it's empty. You can't enter a single building. It's basically just scenery. The only thing really saving this city and giving it any kind of content is the academy. And I actually gotta say, it was pretty great to explore this academy. It has multiple locations, multiple students and staff to talk to. You could even take certain classes. I of course took all the history lessons only so I could learn more about Paldea, and for no other reason whatsoever. Like, why doesn't a town like Alfrenada, a town known for its pottery, have something like a pottery workshop or building that you can enter and see how this pottery is made? Which again, need your help to bring them a few Pokemon to help them speed up the pottery process, thus giving you content. Steal my ideas, Game Freak! Unfortunately, this region and this game has a sort of rushed and missing content problem, to the point where one of the later gyms is just kind of right next to another one. And when you go to it, it's not even a town, it's literally just Pokemon Center, gym, battle court. This cannot be what they intended with this. But let's go ahead and talk about the world. Now let's start with the positives. This world is actually a fully open world. You have more freedom than ever, and it's so easy to go from one point to another. And there is some diverse biomes and locations. There's a desert, there's this big lake, there's a snowy mountaintop, there's canyons, there's a sorta aged grass farmland. Kind of gives me a Westfall from World of Warcraft vibes. One of my favorites has to be this beautiful bamboo forest. Again, I love to see diverse biomes in these regions. That's why I love something like Hoenn. And oh my god, don't get me started on the beauty of Area Zero. The kind of weird geography, the cloudy, misty sky, the waterfalls, that rainbow, all while my ears are being blessed by some Ghost in the Shell type beat music. And then as you go deeper down, you reach one of probably the most beautiful areas in all of these games. This underground cave full of these iridescent giant gems everywhere. Some of them literally forming into all these who knows how long abandoned buildings. And oh my god, just the atmosphere of this area. I read so much about it ahead of time and was worried that they weren't going to deliver. But oh my god, they did. It feels empty and desolate. It feels like it's been left alone for so many years. And it could just be the Ghost in the Shell music, but it's so easy to just feel the awe of this place, how abandoned it feels. This is one of the few caves that actually has a decent amount of level design and paths to go. Also, we're finally starting to see some unique behaviors from the Pokemon in the overworld. You'll tend to find final evolutions of a Pokemon hanging around the first evolutions, kind of almost being a parental figure taking care of the little ones. This helps give the idea that these Pokemon have lives outside of just waiting for us to catch them, like they actually do stuff in the world. But there's also points where Pokemon are doing something specific to their nature. There's that one new bug Pokemon that kind of looks like an old man, yelling at kids to get off their lawn. If you read his Pokedex, it talks about how he tends to leave traps for predators and such. And at times when you find them, they tend to be in the trees seemingly doing that. There was quite a few moments of this sprinkled throughout the world. I found Pineco just kind of chilling up in trees, Sudowoodo just full speed running through routes, Pokemon just sleeping throughout the region. But I still feel we've only kind of scratched the surface of what's possible. Instead of this being kind of a unique thing you only see here and there, I feel like this should be the norm. This should be what you find everywhere. Like, imagine reading the decks about everyone's cute little favorite menace to society Tinkaton, which says that they hunt Corviknights by literally chucking rocks at them, and then actually seeing that in the overworld. Like, you're just exploring, you see a Corviknight in the sky, and then it just gets mollywopped by a fucking rock. and then you walk up to where that's coming from, and it's Tinkaton doing it. Also, props to the developers for this adorable ass sleeping animation from Tinkaton. I love this Kirby character looking at Pokemon. And this time there actually is quite a few more things to do in the world than there was in Hisui. You got the obvious one, like there's raids you can do, there's items to find all over the place, and stakes in the ground. Then of course you have the Starfall bases, the Titan Pokemon. So this game has about the same amount of unique looking levels as Hisui did. But unfortunately, because this is a bigger game, there's also a lot more just basic grassland areas. But I'd say the biggest problem, unfortunately once again, is that Paldea is pretty empty. There's not really anything to do in the world outside of catching Pokemon and the main stuff. This is something that a lot of other open world games have found a way to fix. With Witcher 3, there's a bunch of interesting side quests you can do all over the world. With Elden Ring, you have all those little mini dungeons everywhere, but also just genuine interesting discoveries to find. Like, do not get me started on the underground city. Oh my god. But here, not much. At least not enough. Like, sure, it might have more to do in it than Hisui or Galar, but when you're going from point A to point B, there's nothing interesting in between. No landmarks with trainers or well-designed caves to explore. There's still more complexity here than there pretty much is in most of the caves in Paldea, or even interesting side quests at all. So here's some things that they could add to fill out this world. Again, you always have the most obvious one, landmarks like haunted houses or towers or really anything of interest with some trainers to battle. Or much like my Tinkaton example, I think literally taking things that it says in the Pokedex and just translating it onto the world, making it so the Pokemon are literally doing what their Pokedex entry says, but in the actual world, would be a great way to make the world more interesting just by using Pokemon. That would make both the world and Pokemon way more interesting and immersive. Side quests in general, or just interesting side content. We'll use a prior game as an example. That whole side mission in Fire Red when the Hypno kidnaps the little girl and takes her to the Berry Forest, and then you have to go in there and save her. Having little stories like that involve Pokemon and people all throughout the world would make it much more interesting and content filled. While I think this world itself is a pretty good base, unfortunately, there's just not enough interesting content to fill it out. It's funny because I'm only asking for stuff that's been a part of these games for so long now. Just throwing some random ruins every now and then doesn't really do it for me. And there's still no Victory Road! Why? And even these things, the Starfall bases, the Titan Pokemon, are a bit undercooked. I love that you could see the Titan Pokemon in the world, but interacting with it is just like a battle, and then another battle, and then you go into a very same looking cave every time and have a pretty similar cutscene. Like, don't get me wrong, I love the character attached to it, I love the story element, but I would have preferred if after we almost beat him the first time, the Titan goes into like an actual lair, like a cave with actual great Pokemon level design, and then when you reach the very end of that lair, then you find the Titan, and then you fight him. That would make this feel a lot more substantial as content. And the Starfall base is not only are you doing pretty much the exact same thing every single time with just a different trainer, the bases themselves are basically empty. The NPCs you find at one Starfall base don't say anything different from another, and the base itself all look the same. This could have been improved by having different tests for each, and maybe having the base be unique to the aesthetic of that member. There's like 7 of these, and none of them are as interesting or as content-filled as Townnnn, and that only had like 2 buildings you could enter anyway. And with both of these games, while I feel they're both better than Sword and Shield, which for one, that bar is like in hell, there is one glaring thing that has continued since Sword and Shield's release. And that is Game Freak making these games that have potential to be great, but then suffering from this weird sense of unfinishedness or rushed development. Which, especially in these cases, it makes it much more disappointing. There's so many good to great things about both of these games, but the things I love most about this series can't be as great because it feels rushed. It feels like it's missing content. And since then, there's been this criticism that it's because Game Freak is lazy. But why would lazy developers spend so much time on little interesting details with their Pokemon, for example? Why would they even make something as different as Arceus? Why do they keep trying to make this more grand open world? And honestly, getting closer to it every time. To me, that doesn't read as a lazy dev team. So why is it with each release it feels like Game Freak wants to make more ambitious games, but are cutting even more corners? Well, personally, I don't think it's because Game Freak is lazy. At least I don't think the developers at Game Freak are lazy. All of these issues in tandem, the quick succession that these games were released in, all the missing content that is mostly things that used to be in these games, and the, as of late, very undercooked release. I think that these all stem not from laziness, but from Game Freak not having enough time. Less and less NPCs with interesting things to say, less and less buildings that you can actually enter, and less interesting designed caves are all, I think, more a sign of harsh deadlines. I think if Game Freak had the proper amount of time to make these games, I think those things would be fleshed out. Literally making it so when you enter a shop, there's no actual interior, it's just a straight up menu. That doesn't read to me as a design choice, but a design concession. Pokemon is the most profitable brand ever. These games in the grand scheme of Pokemon's profit don't even factor in that much. At least the people running this whole thing, it seems more like what matters to them isn't that these games are great, but that they come in time to drop with everything else. If a new gen is dropping, then everything about Pokemon has to come in at around the same time. The time of the release of the game has to tie in to the anime, has to tie in to the merch. That timing takes precedent over everything else, regardless of how undercooked the game is, whether that means bad performance or one of the worst regions in the entire series. They don't care, just get it out in time to go along with everything else. And if anything, it doesn't help that me and pretty much every Pokemon fan will buy these games regardless. All that shows to those higher ups is that it doesn't really matter. They'll buy anything. As long as it's not hurting that bank, there's really no reason as to why they need to make sure that these games are as great as they could be. It's clear to me that Game Freak isn't lazy. They want these games to be great, just like we do, but they're not given the amount of time they need to make them great because of these harsh deadlines. In a sense, Pokemon is suffering from success. I don't really know where this series is gonna go from here, and maybe it's just the coping Pokemon fan in me speaking, but my last strand of hope is that because a bunch of people did refund this game, that might tell something to these people that are running this whole thing to give Game Freak and their developers more ample time to fully flesh out these games. And that is all I have to say about the state of Pokemon currently in its regions. I hope for those of you who saw the first video, this one was just as enjoyable. Probably one more video coming up, it's gonna be an anime one, and then after that, it's gonna be the big ol' 100K sub goal. As always, thank you so much for supporting me. Wouldn't be here without y'all. Tell me in the comments some of your favorite Pokemon from these new games. Tell me which one you like better. Tell me your opinions on the regions and these games in general. And if you're new here and you like what I do, you can always leave me a like and a subscribe. I'll always appreciate that. But without further ado, thank you so much for coming to this little pit stop on the corner of the internet. Peace. Oh.